When energy is gone, identity remains. There is a kind of discipline that survives after energy leaves the body. Cold air fills the lungs before sunrise, legs stiff, hands slow, and still the body stands. Others stay in bed. You move. Not with force. With habit carved deeper than mood. Most people think discipline collapses when motivation fades. That belief is why their routines rot quietly. They wait for energy, then blame the day when it never arrives. You've seen it, promises spoken loud, then softened by excuses that sound reasonable in the mouth. In old temples and empty training halls, no one asks how they feel. The floor is cold. Knees touch it anyway. The belt is tied the same way, even when fingers shake. Someone watching might call it rigid. They step back, uneasy. This is not effort. This is identity continuing after desire withdraws. If this unsettles you, stay. If not, leave now, the morning that never asks permission. He wakes before the alarm, not from purpose but from weight. The body feels used. Dry mouth. Heavy eyelids. A dull ache along the calves where yesterday never fully ended. The room is quiet enough to hear the radiator click. He sits up anyway. Across the hall, someone turns over and disappears back into sleep. The contrast lingers. There is a moment here where most people bargain. He doesn't feel strong. His shoulders are tight. Breath shallow. The floor is cold when his feet touch it, and the chill climbs the spine without apology. He stands because standing has already been decided. That decision is old. Clothes are pulled on without inspection. Hands move with less precision than usual, fingers stiff, knuckles swollen, but the sequence holds. The belt is tied the same way. Not neatly. Correctly. In the mirror, his face looks thinner today. He doesn't correct it. The reflection watches back, neutral. Outside, the air scrapes the lungs on the first breath. A neighbor nods from across the street, half amused, half confused. "You're out early again," they say, voice still wrapped in sleep. He answers with a short nod and keeps moving. The distance grows. So does the silence. Energy does not arrive. The legs feel slow. Each step lands heavier than yesterday. There is a faint pressure behind the eyes, the kind that makes thinking noisy. He doesn't try to fix it. The body moves inside the noise, not against it. Others would call this low battery. They would postpone. Adjust. Promise to return when conditions improve. That promise sounds kind. It is also fatal. He passes the corner where quitting usually feels reasonable, and the absence of drama unsettles something. Repetition carries him forward. The route is familiar enough that attention drifts to sensation, breath rasping, pulse steadying, sweat forming late and thin. A passerby glances twice, perhaps wondering what compels someone to move like this without visible urgency. There is no answer that would satisfy them. Halfway through, fatigue sharpens. The body sends its usual signals, tight hamstrings, a dull burn along the spine, a quiet request to slow down. He slows slightly. Not to stop. To continue. Intensity adjusts. Continuity does not. This is where identity begins to surface. Not as a thought, but as an absence of argument. The body no longer waits for agreement from the mind. Movement happens first. Meaning trails behind, trying to keep up. By the time he returns, the room is warmer. Others are waking now, voices louder, coffee machines humming. Someone asks how he finds the energy. He shrugs, towel over his neck, skin still reacting to cold air. There was no energy to find. Only a structure that held when energy refused to participate. And that realization presses forward, unresolved, as the day finally begins. Negotiation is where mornings go to die. The first argument arrives quietly. Not as refusal, but as suggestion. The body sits on the edge of the bed, spine stiff, breath shallow, and a voice offers a compromise that sounds reasonable in the dark. Just today. Recover properly. Start again tomorrow. The mattress holds warmth like a hand. He stands before the argument finishes. The floor is colder than expected. Ankles tense. Toes curl. The room feels wider when upright, less forgiving. Someone in the next apartment laughs at a phone video. The sound floats through the wall, casual, unconcerned. This is where discipline usually fractures. Not in collapse, but in conversation. The body sends reports, tight shoulders, dry throat, eyes slow to focus, and the mind begins translating them into permission. He does not answer. The silence cuts the negotiation short. Water runs in the sink. Hands cup it without ceremony. The cold shocks the skin awake. He splashes his face once, twice, not to feel better, but to mark the transition. In the mirror, his expression is flat. Someone else might mistake it for resentment. The routine continues without enthusiasm. Shoes by the door are already positioned. Laces pull against stiff fingers. The knot forms the same way it always does, slightly off-center, functional. A passing thought tries to rename this as obsession. He lets it pass without defense. Outside, the street offers its commentary. A jogger stretches theatrically, checking a watch, performing readiness. A delivery driver leans against a truck, scrolling, glancing over with mild curiosity. He moves between them, unnoticed, which is preferable. The body warms slowly. Breath deepens by degrees. The ache in the lower back dulls, not disappears. There is no surge of energy, no emotional reward. Only the removal of friction where argument used to live. This is the unseen advantage. When choice disappears, fatigue loses its leverage. He adjusts pace when the legs tighten, shortens stride when the lungs protest, but the direction never changes. Someone watching might assume discipline requires intensity. They would be wrong. Midway through, rain begins without warning. Cold drops tap the forearms, soak the collar. A voice suggests shelter. Another suggests speed. He changes neither. The route absorbs the weather. So does he. At the turn back, a familiar hesitation used to wait. It isn't there anymore. The absence feels heavier than resistance ever did, like a door that no longer exists. He realizes the negotiation hasn't just weakened. It has been starved. By the time he returns, clothes damp, skin flushed, the house is louder. Someone asked why he didn't skip with the rain. He shrugs, reaching for a towel, pulse settling on its own. Skipping was never on the table. The argument needed conditions. Those conditions are gone. And something else is forming in that silence, patient, unfinished, waiting for the next test. The body moves before consent is given. Fatigue does not announce itself anymore. It seeps in during small moments, while tying laces, while lifting a cup, while the spine stiffens after sitting too long. The shoulders stay tight longer than they used to. The legs hold a dull ache that never fully leaves. He notices without pausing, the way one notices weather while walking. Training begins the same way regardless. Hands wrap the handle the same way. Feet find the same spacing on the floor. The mat is cool through thin fabric, knees pressing down, pressure spreading into bone. Someone nearby adjusts their stance repeatedly, glancing over, unsettled by the lack of warm-up. The body responds before the mind has language. Breath counts return on their own. The pulse steadies without instruction. There is resistance, heat behind the eyes, a faint tremor in the forearms, but it no longer asks permission. Movement happens first. Thought trails behind, slightly late. Others notice the absence of ceremony. No stretching ritual. No visible psyching up. A comment slips out, "You look tired today." He nods once and continues. The space between them grows awkward. Repetition fills the room. The same motion, repeated without escalation, without apology. Skin warms. Sweat forms slowly, late, as if the body is conserving something. The sound of breath becomes the only marker of effort. This is where most people attempt to override the body. They push, chase intensity, try to feel alive again. He does not. When the legs tighten, the range shortens. When balance wavers, speed drops. The sequence remains intact. A younger man watches from the edge, restless. He starts strong, fast, aggressive. By the fourth repetition his form loosens, frustration visible in his jaw. He glances over again, confused by the contrast. The discipline here is quiet. It does not seek proof. The body has learned that showing up does not require permission from energy. Energy is treated like weather, noticed, not obeyed. Halfway through, the familiar urge to stop whispers. Not loudly. Politely. A suggestion that enough has been done to count. The hands tighten slightly. The next movement begins anyway. This is the shift. Not victory. Not pride. Just the removal of a pause where debate used to live. The body completes the work, then rests without celebration. When the session ends, there is no relief. Only stillness. Breath slowing. Heat fading from the skin. Someone claps him on the shoulder and laughs, calling him relentless. The word doesn't fit. It never has. Relentlessness implies force. This feels closer to gravity. The body returns to order when released, as if this is where it belongs. And that realization hangs there, heavy, waiting to test itself again tomorrow. Continuity holds when perfection breaks. Some days arrive damaged. Sleep fractured. Appetite missing. The body feels thin, like it didn't fully arrive. He notices it while standing at the sink, hands resting on the edge, shoulders slumped forward more than usual. Someone else would label the day a loss before it begins. He doesn't repair it. The belt is tied anyway, a notch looser than normal. Shoes feel heavier. The laces resist stiff fingers. Outside, the air presses down, humid, impatient, as if asking for an excuse. Training shrinks without announcement. The first movements are slower, range shortened, weight shifted cautiously to protect something that feels unstable. A nearby trainee smirks, mistaking restraint for weakness. The glance lands and slides off without response. This is where perfection dies for most people. They want the full version or nothing at all. When the body can't deliver, they withdraw completely, calling it wisdom. He stays. Not fully. Just enough. The floor is still cold. Knees fold onto it without ceremony. The ache in the lower back flares briefly, then settles into a manageable hum. He breathes shallow at first, then deeper, not chasing rhythm, letting it return on its own. Continuity doesn't announce itself as discipline. It feels smaller than that. Almost insignificant. A single sequence completed without sharpness. Another begun without enthusiasm. Someone watching might wonder why he bothers. Halfway through, the gap reveals itself. Not in failure, but in absence of ambition. There is no attempt to prove anything today. The body appreciates that and responds by staying present. A man nearby stops early, stretching dramatically, explaining an old injury to anyone listening. The story grows with each sentence. He nods politely when addressed, sweat cooling on his neck, pulse still elevated. The explanation isn't needed. This is how chains stay unbroken. Not by heroic days, but by unimpressive ones completed quietly. When energy drops, intensity follows it down. The act itself remains untouched. At the end, he sits longer than usual. Hands rest on thighs. Breath slows. The room empties around him. Someone asks if he's feeling okay. He answers with a short yes, because it's true enough. Walking home, fatigue deepens instead of lifting. There is no post-session clarity, no emotional reward. Only the quiet knowledge that the line was not broken today. And that knowledge presses forward, unresolved. waiting to see how long it can hold. Pre-decided responses outlast willpower. The disruption never announces itself early. It arrives disguised as inconvenience. A late meeting. A sick morning. Rain that doesn't stop. He feels it when the phone buzzes while he's lacing his shoes, calf already tight, breath shallow from a shortened night. Most people pause here. They calculate, reorganize, promise to compensate later. The body senses the opening and leans back, shoulders softening, relief spreading too fast. He doesn't sit down. The plan narrows instead of breaking. The route shortens. The duration compresses. Hands still pull the laces tight, not forming by muscle memory. Someone watching from the doorway asks if it's even worth it today. He answers by opening the door. Cold air hits the face immediately, skin tightening, jaw clenching once before releasing. The question lingers behind him, unanswered, growing irrelevant with each step. The street doesn't care about his schedule. This was decided long ago. Not in detail, but in direction. When time collapses, movement shrinks, not disappears. When energy drops, intensity fades, not consistency. Rain begins halfway through, heavier than expected. Water darkens the fabric, chills the forearms, seeps into the collar. A thought suggests shelter, framed as practicality. He keeps the same pace, letting discomfort take its place without commentary. This is the advantage of pre-decision. There is no moment of heroism. No surge of resolve. Only execution inside narrowed conditions. A car slows as it passes, the driver staring openly now. "You're really doing this?" They call through a cracked window, half laughing. He nods once, not unkindly, and moves on. The gap between them feels wider than the street. The body adapts quietly. Steps shorten. Shoulders drop to conserve heat. Breath turns rhythmic again, even as water runs into the eyes. The system adjusts without complaint. Back home, soaked, hands stiff, he peels off layers slowly. The room smells faintly of damp fabric. Someone shakes their head, amused, calling him inflexible. The word lands and stays there, testing him. Inflexible would imply resistance. This feels closer to alignment. The action changed shape without changing direction. The chain holds because it doesn't depend on circumstances. Later, when the day unravels fully, he notices something missing. There is no guilt about what wasn't done. No itch to compensate. Only the quiet certainty that the response was already chosen. That certainty doesn't celebrate. It waits. Because tomorrow will offer a different disruption, and it will ask the same question again, when others begin to feel uncomfortable. The change is noticed before it is understood. Not by him, but by the people around him. It shows up in pauses, in jokes that land a little sharp, in invitations that arrive later than they used to. He feels it when the room goes quiet after he mentions his schedule, shoulders tightening slightly as eyes shift away. At work, someone laughs and calls him rigid. The word is meant lightly, but it carries a warning. He's standing near the window, back straight, breath steady, hands still from the morning's repetition. He nods once, returns to the task, and the conversation reroutes around him. This is the social cost of continuity. When your actions stop responding to mood, they stop reassuring others. They look for flexibility as proof you're still like them. The absence of it makes them uneasy. A friend suggests skipping a session just this once, framing it as balance. They lean back in the chair, relaxed, confident in the reasonableness of the offer. He feels the familiar dull ache in the legs, the residue of earlier work still present. He declines without explanation. The silence stretches longer than necessary. At training, newer faces watch closely. They notice the lack of drama. No visible struggle. No visible reward. One of them finally asks how he stays driven when energy is low. He wipes sweat from his forearm, skin still warm, pulse slowing on its own. "I don't," he says, and returns to his place. The answer doesn't satisfy. It isn't meant to. The question itself feels misplaced now. Over time, the pattern becomes predictable. He arrives when he said he would. Leaves when the work is done. No commentary. No fluctuation. People begin to adjust their expectations around him, and that adjustment feels like pressure. Some pull away. Others test boundaries, arriving late, canceling plans, watching for a reaction. He feels the brief irritation rise, tight jaw, shallow breath, then pass. The response doesn't change. This is where identity finishes setting. Not internally, but externally. When others stop expecting you to negotiate, they stop offering negotiations. The space around you reorganizes itself. Walking home one evening, shoulders heavy, steps slower than usual, he notices the absence of noise. No messages asking for favors. No casual interruptions. The quiet feels earned, but not comfortable. Comfort was never the goal. Order was. And as that order hardens, it becomes clear that the real test isn't exhaustion. It's the distance that forms when you stop moving with the crowd. That distance is growing now, and it hasn't finished asking its question yet: what remains after energy stops arguing? The body learns first. Not through insight, but through repetition that refuses to explain itself. He feels it one morning when exhaustion is present but irrelevant, like background noise that no longer demands response. The breath is steady. The joints complain quietly. Movement begins without a vote. There is no sense of arrival. No moment where discipline announces success. Only the absence of the old hesitation, the empty space where energy used to negotiate terms. He notices it when the routine ends and there is nothing to recover from emotionally. This is not momentum. Momentum fades when pressure lifts. This feels denser than that, heavier, like weight settling into the ground. The body expects order now, and reacts poorly when it doesn't get it. On a rare missed session, the discomfort is immediate. Not guilt. Not shame. A low-grade irritation spreads through the chest, posture tightening, breath shallow for no clear reason. Others call this burnout. He recognizes it as misalignment. Energy still fluctuates. Some days the legs feel hollow. Some mornings the spine resists straightening. But the response no longer changes. The body moves because that is the baseline condition. At training, he stops checking the clock. Duration loses meaning. The sequence completes itself, hands repeating their placement, knees folding, breath counting itself back into rhythm. Someone nearby pushes harder, louder, searching for proof. He finishes and sits. Sweat cools on the skin. The room hums with other people's effort. A quiet settles inside that has nothing to do with satisfaction. It feels closer to acceptance. This is discipline after energy withdraws. Stripped of emotion. Stripped of performance. Only structure remains. People mistake this for obsession. They ask what happens when motivation disappears. He doesn't answer. The question no longer fits the shape of his days. Motivation implies choice. Choice left a long time ago. Walking home, evening air pressing against tired shoulders, he realizes something unsettling. Rest days feel the same as work days now. Not easier. Not harder. Just ordered. This is the final shift. When discipline no longer feels like something you maintain. When it feels like gravity, present whether you acknowledge it or not. And gravity doesn't care how much energy you brought with you. Discipline exists after motivation leaves. Discipline is not what shows up when energy is high. That version collapses as soon as the body asks for mercy. What remains is quieter, colder, less interested in how you feel. By now, the pattern is visible. The days no longer ask for enthusiasm. The body moves without ceremony, shoulders heavy, breath steady, joints protesting just enough to be noticed. There is no inner speech cheering you on. There doesn't need to be. This is where discipline stops being an action. It becomes a condition. Like posture. Like gravity. When it's missing, something feels wrong immediately. Most people chase discipline the way they chase energy. They wait for the right mood. They talk themselves into starting again. You've stepped past that cycle. The unshakable person isn't the strongest. It's the one who no longer negotiates. Not because they are strict, but because there is nothing left to debate. When discipline becomes identity, exhaustion loses its authority. You still feel it in the legs, in the spine, in the slow exhale at the end of the day. But it no longer decides anything. This is the quiet cost. You become predictable. Others stop offering you exits. And in that narrowing, your days begin to hold their shape. If this exposed something uncomfortable, name it publicly. One action. No explanation. That is how identity locks.